The dust-choked streets of Ardmore, Oklahoma Territory, 1885, offered little comfort to Eleanor Blackwell as she stood outside the general store, her trembling hands clutching the letter that had shattered her world. The train that had brought her west 2 weeks ago now seemed like a distant memory, much like the faith she'd once held so dearly. The blazing afternoon sun beat down on Eleanor's shoulders as she crumpled the letter and stuffed it into her pocket. Her fiancé's words burned in her mind. "I have found another. Do not attempt to contact me again." 6 years of devotion erased with a single sheet of paper. "Miss, you're blocking the doorway," a gruff voice said behind her. Eleanor stepped aside without looking up, wiping away a tear with the back of her hand. "I apologize. No need for that. Just didn't want you getting trampled when the Wilkins boys come tearing through here like they own the place," the man said, his voice softening. She looked up then, meeting eyes the color of a summer sky, set in a weathered face beneath a worn Stetson. He wasn't particularly handsome in the conventional sense. His nose had clearly been broken at least once, and a thin scar ran along his jawline, but there was something compelling about him. "Yates Aldridge," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "You must be new to Ardmore." "Eleanor Blackwell," she replied automatically. "Yes, I arrived 2 weeks ago to." Her voice faltered. "To what? To marry a man who'd given his heart to another, to start a life that would never be." "It doesn't matter anymore." Yates studied her for a moment. "Seems like it matters plenty, Miss Blackwell." Eleanor couldn't explain why, but something in his steady gaze made her continue. "I came to marry a man who no longer wants me, and now I'm alone in a strange town with no purpose and no—" "No what?" he asked when she trailed off. "No faith," Eleanor whispered, the admission burning her throat. "I lost my faith." Yates shifted the package under his arm and glanced at the setting sun. His expression was thoughtful rather than pitying, which Eleanor found oddly comforting. "Then borrow mine for a while," he said simply. "I've got plenty to spare." Eleanor blinked at him, uncertain if she'd heard correctly. "Pardon me, my faith," he repeated. "I've got enough for two. You can borrow some until you find yours again." He gestured toward the end of the street. "I'm headed to the church social. Pastor Williams always sets a good table. You're welcome to join if you're hungry." Eleanor hesitated. The thought of facing strangers, of forcing pleasantries when her heart was breaking, seemed impossible. Yet the alternative, returning to her rented room at Mrs. Hanson's boarding house to stare at the ceiling, held even less appeal. "I wouldn't want to impose," she said weakly. Yates laughed, a warm sound that seemed to chase away some of the day's chill. "It's a church social, Miss Blackwell. The whole point is to impose on one another. That's how community works out here." Before she could refuse again, Eleanor's stomach growled loudly enough for both of them to hear, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Seems your stomach has made the decision," Yates said with a smile. "Come on, the walk will do you good." As they strolled toward the white steeple rising above the town's modest skyline, Eleanor found herself studying her unexpected companion. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. Tipping his hat to ladies, they passed and exchanging brief greetings with the men. "You seem to know everyone," Eleanor observed. "Been in Ardmore most of my life," Yates replied. "Left for a spell during the war, came back when it was over. Couldn't imagine living anywhere else." "What do you do, Mr. Aldridge?" "I run cattle on a spread about 5 miles east of town." "Nothing fancy, but the land's good and the water's reliable." He glanced at her. "And it's Yates. Mr. Aldridge was my father, God rest him." As they approached the church, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifted toward them. Lanterns hung from the trees surrounding the simple wooden building, casting a warm glow over tables laden with food and people gathered in small groups. Eleanor faltered, suddenly overwhelmed. Perhaps this wasn't the best idea. Yates stopped beside her. "Nobody's going to ask anything you don't want to answer," he said quietly. "But if you'd prefer to go back to town, I understand." Eleanor took a deep breath. She'd come west to start a new life, even if that life now looked different than she'd planned. Running back to her rented room wouldn't change anything. "No," she said with more conviction than she felt. "I'm hungry and you promised good food." Yates smiled. "That I did." The social was unlike anything Eleanor had experienced in Boston. The formality she was accustomed to was absent, replaced by a genuine warmth that surprised her. Yates introduced her simply as Miss Blackwell, new to town, offering no further explanation, for which she was grateful. Pastor Williams, a robust man with kind eyes and an impressive beard, welcomed her enthusiastically. "Any friend of Yates Aldridge is a friend of ours," he declared, pressing a plate into her hands. "Now eat before Mrs. Summers' fried chicken disappears. It's famous in 3 counties." Eleanor found herself at a table with Yates and several others, including the town's schoolteacher, Miss Harriet Palmer, and the blacksmith, Jacob Turner, and his wife Sarah. The conversation flowed around her, touching on everything from the recent rain, not enough, to the coming harvest festival promising to be the best yet. "What brings you to Ardmore, Miss Blackwell?" Mrs. Turner asked eventually. Eleanor tensed, but Yates smoothly intervened. "Miss Blackwell came for a change of scenery," he said. "Boston gets mighty cold in the winter, I hear." "Oh, you're from Boston," Miss Palmer leaned forward eagerly. "I've always wanted to visit. Is the library as magnificent as they say?" Grateful for the redirection, Eleanor launched into a description of the Boston Public Library, her spirits lifting as she spoke of the familiar. By the time she finished her second helping of peach cobbler, she'd almost forgotten the crumpled letter in her pocket. As the evening progressed, people began drifting away in 2s and 3s. Eleanor found herself helping to clear tables, working alongside women who accepted her presence without question. "You'll stay with Mrs. Hanson, I expect." Yates asked as they walked back toward town, the night air cool against their skin. "For now," Eleanor replied, "though I'll need to find work soon. My funds won't last forever." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "Miss Palmer mentioned the school might need an assistant." "The town's growing faster than she can manage alone." "I've never taught children," Eleanor admitted. "Can you read and write?" "Of course." "Do you know arithmetic?" "Yes." "Then you're already ahead of half the people in the territory," Yates said with a grin. "Miss Palmer would be grateful for the help, I'm sure." They reached Mrs. Hanson's boarding house too quickly for Eleanor's liking. Something about Yates Aldridge's quiet confidence made her feel less adrift. "Thank you for the evening," she said, pausing at the gate. "It was unexpected." Yates touched the brim of his hat. "Life out here usually is. Good night, Miss Blackwell." "Good night, Mr. Yates." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Eleanor found herself smiling for the first time since the letter had arrived. Perhaps borrowing someone else's faith wasn't such a strange idea after all. The following morning, Eleanor woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in days. After a simple breakfast with the other boarders, she made her way to the schoolhouse, a modest building at the edge of town. Harriet Palmer was struggling with an armful of books when Eleanor arrived, nearly dropping several as she attempted to unlock the door. "Let me help," Eleanor offered, taking half the stack. "Oh, Miss Blackwell, how kind of you," Harriet said, flushing slightly. "I'm afraid I'm always overly ambitious about what I can carry." Once inside, Eleanor helped arrange the books on shelves while Harriet prepared for the day's lessons. The schoolroom was simple but welcoming, with rows of wooden desks facing a larger desk and blackboard. "Yates Aldridge mentioned you might need assistance," Eleanor said finally when the last book was in place. Harriet's face brightened. "Did he? Oh, that man, always looking out for everyone." She brushed chalk dust from her hands. "I've been begging the town council for an assistant for months. The younger children need more attention than I can give while teaching the older ones their algebra." "I have no experience teaching," Eleanor admitted, "but I'm a quick learner and I need the work." Harriet waved away her concerns. "Experience is overrated. What children need is patience and consistency. Do you have those?" Eleanor thought about the 6 years she'd waited for a man who'd abandoned her. "Patience, yes. Consistency, I'm working on that." "Good enough for me," Harriet declared. "Can you start today?" "You can observe this morning and perhaps take the younger ones for reading after lunch." Just like that, Eleanor had a job. The day passed in a whirlwind of introductions, lessons, and the controlled chaos that was 28 children of varying ages confined to a single room. By dismissal time, Eleanor's head was spinning, but she felt more alive than she had in weeks. "You're a natural," Harriet said as they tidied the classroom. "The little ones adore you already." "They're wonderful children," Eleanor replied, surprised to realize she meant it. The simple directness of the younger students was refreshing after the layers of propriety she'd navigated in Boston. As they locked up the schoolhouse, Harriet hesitated. "A few of us gather for dinner at the cafe on Wednesdays. Nothing fancy, just friendship and conversation. Would you care to join us tonight?" Eleanor found herself accepting without hesitation. The thought of another evening of company was appealing, even if Yates Aldridge wouldn't be present. But when she arrived at the small cafe, she was surprised to see him seated at a large table with Harriet, Pastor Williams, and several others she recognized from the social. He stood as she approached, pulling out a chair beside him. "Miss Blackwell," he greeted her. "Harriet tells me you've already revolutionized the schoolroom." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "Hardly. I merely helped with the younger children's reading, and prevented young Tommy Jenkins from eating a worm on a dare," Harriet added with a laugh. "That alone is worth your weight in gold." The dinner was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, and the conversation flowed easily. Eleanor found herself laughing at Pastor William's stories of his early days in the territory and nodding in agreement as Jacob Turner's wife discussed the challenges of the coming winter. "How was your first day teaching?" Yates asked quietly as the others debated the merits of the new railroad spur being built to the north. "Exhausting," Eleanor admitted, "but in a good way. The children are eager to learn, even if they're sometimes more interested in each other's lunch pails." Yates chuckled. "Children have their priorities straight. Learning's important, but so is knowing who has the best apple pie." "Did you attend school here?" Eleanor asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about the man beside her. "For a time," Yates nodded. "Until my father needed me on the ranch, but my mother made sure I kept up with my reading." A shadow crossed his face. She believed education was the key to a better life. She sounds wise. She was. The simple past tense told Eleanor all she needed to know. "And your father?" "Past 5 years ago, pneumonia took him quick." Yates toyed with his water glass. "That's when I took over the ranch full time." "It must be lonely," Eleanor said without thinking. Yates glanced at her, surprised. "At times, but there's always work to be done and town isn't far." He nodded toward the others at the table. "And I have good friends." As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself watching Yates more closely. There was a steadiness to him that she found compelling. Unlike the sophisticated men she'd known in Boston who measured their words carefully for effect, Yates spoke plainly but thoughtfully. When he listened, he did so completely, giving the speaker his full attention. "Walk you home?" he asked as they left the cafe. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Eleanor breathed deeply, savoring the crisp air. "The stars are different here," she observed. "Brighter somehow." "Less competition from city lights," Yates replied, falling into step beside her. "Out at the ranch on a clear night like this, you can see so many stars it's hard to find the constellations." "You know the constellations," he nodded. "My mother taught me. She said it was important to be able to find your way home, no matter how far you roamed." "She sounds remarkable." "She was," Yates pointed upward. "See there, that's Cassiopeia, the queen who boasted of her beauty." Eleanor followed his gaze. "The W shape, that's right, and there the Big Dipper. Follow those 2 stars at the edge of the cup." He guided her hand, pointing. "They lead to the North Star." Always constant, always showing the way north. His hand was warm against hers, calloused but gentle. Eleanor was suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how his voice had softened as he spoke of the stars. "I should." She stepped back slightly, flustered. "It's getting late." Yates dropped his hand, nodding. "Of course, you must be tired after your first day teaching." They continued to Mrs. Hanson's in comfortable silence, pausing at the gate as they had the night before. "Thank you for including me tonight," Eleanor said. "It was our pleasure," Yates replied. "Will you be at the Harvest Festival on Saturday?" Eleanor hesitated. "I hadn't thought about it. You should come. The whole town turns out. There's dancing, games for the children, more food than anyone can eat," he smiled. It's a good way to feel part of the community. Part of the community. The words resonated with Eleanor. In just 2 days, she'd gone from complete isolation to having colleagues, dinner companions, and now an invitation to a town celebration. "I'll consider it," she said. Yates tipped his hat. "Good night, Eleanor." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his voice made her stomach flutter. "Good night, Yates." The rest of the week passed in a blur of teaching, planning lessons with Harriet, and gradually settling into the rhythms of Ardmore. Eleanor found herself looking forward to each day, curious about what new challenges her students would present and what small triumphs they might achieve together. By Friday, she had almost convinced herself that her previous life, the failed engagement, the journey west, the crushing disappointment had happened to someone else. Then another letter arrived, this one from her mother. Eleanor read it in her room at Mrs. Hanson's, her hands trembling slightly. "Dearest Eleanor," her mother wrote, "your father and I were devastated to learn of Charles's unconscionable behavior. His father has called upon us to express his deep regret for his son's actions, though that is small comfort, I know. Please consider returning home. There is nothing for you in that wild place and much here that is familiar and safe. Your room remains as you left it, and your father has spoken to Mr. Thornton at the library, who assures us your position can be restored." Eleanor sat heavily on her bed. Home, Boston. The familiar streets and faces, the pitying looks and whispered conversations that would follow her everywhere. "No," she said aloud, "I can't go back." But the letter had reopened wounds she'd thought were beginning to heal. That night she begged off dinner with Harriet, claiming a headache. She lay awake long into the night, her mother's words echoing in her mind. "There is nothing for you in that wild place." Was that true? A week ago she might have agreed, but now. She had work that mattered, children who looked to her for guidance, and people who seemed genuinely pleased to see her each day, and there was Yates Aldridge, with his quiet strength and unexpected kindness. Eleanor rose with the dawn on Saturday, having made her decision. She would write to her mother explaining her choice to stay, at least for now. She would attend the Harvest Festival. She would continue borrowing Yates's faith until she found her own again. The main street of Ardmore was transformed when Eleanor ventured out later that morning. Bunting hung from the storefronts, tables lined the thoroughfare loaded with everything from baked goods to handcrafted items, and children darted about in excitement. At the far end of the street, a space had been cleared for dancing, with several men tuning instruments on a makeshift platform. "Miss Blackwell," Tommy Jenkins, one of her youngest students, ran up to her, his face sticky with what appeared to be candy. "Are you going to try the apple bobbing? I got 3, perhaps later," Eleanor laughed, wiping a smudge from his cheek with her handkerchief. "Where is your mother?" "Over by the quilts with the ladies," Tommy pointed. "She made the one with the star pattern." "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, admiring the intricate design. "You must be very proud." "She says I can have it when I get married," Tommy made a face, "but that's forever away." "Indeed it is," Eleanor agreed solemnly. "Now, shouldn't you be playing with your friends instead of worrying about marriage?" Tommy's eyes widened. "The sack race, I almost forgot." He darted off, disappearing into the crowd. Eleanor wandered through the festival, stopping to admire crafts and sample foods. Several of her students greeted her enthusiastically, dragging her over to meet parents or grandparents who hadn't yet made her acquaintance. "Miss Blackwell is the best teacher ever," little Mary Sullivan declared to her grandmother. "She does all the voices when she reads stories." "Is that so?" Mrs. Sullivan smiled warmly at Eleanor. "Mary has talked of nothing else all week." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. This, she realized, was what had been missing in Boston, a sense of making a real difference, however small. "Eleanor," she turned to see Harriet waving from a booth where jars of preserves were displayed. "Come try Mrs. Turner's blackberry jam. It won the county fair last month." As Eleanor made her way over, she caught sight of Yates across the street, deep in conversation with a man she didn't recognize. He must have felt her gaze, for he looked up suddenly, meeting her eyes with a smile that made her breath catch. He excused himself from his companion and crossed to join her, dodging a group of running children with practiced ease. "You came," he said simply. "I did," Eleanor nodded. It seemed a shame to miss all this excitement. "Have you eaten? Mrs. Davidson's fried chicken rivals Mrs. Summers, though don't tell either I said so." "I've been sampling my way through the festival," Eleanor admitted. "I fear I won't be able to eat again for days." Yates laughed. "That's the spirit of a harvest festival. Eat until you can barely move, then dance it off and start again." He offered his arm. "Speaking of dancing, they're about to start. Would you do me the honor?" Eleanor hesitated. In Boston, accepting such an invitation would have carried significant implications. But this was Ardmore, where the rules seemed different, more straightforward. "I'd like that," she said, placing her hand on his arm. The band, a fiddler, a guitarist, and a man with a harmonica, struck up a lively tune as they approached the dancing area. Several couples had already taken to the floor, spinning and laughing under the afternoon sun. "I should warn you," Eleanor said as Yates led her to an open space, "I'm more familiar with waltzes than whatever this is." "Just follow my lead," Yates replied, taking her hand. "It's simpler than it looks." And it was, once Eleanor stopped trying to anticipate the steps and simply let herself be guided. Yates was a surprisingly good dancer, moving with the same natural confidence he showed in everything else. His hand was warm at her waist, steadying her when she missed a step, guiding her through turns with gentle pressure. "You're a quick learner," he said as the song ended, both of them slightly breathless. "I had a good teacher," Eleanor replied, flushed with exertion and something else she wasn't ready to name. They danced 2 more songs before taking a break, accepting cups of cool cider from a grinning Pastor Williams. "You two make a fine pair on the dance floor," he observed. "Almost as good as Sarah and Jacob Turner, and they've been practicing for 20 years. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm at the implied comparison. "Yates is kind enough to overlook my missteps." "Nonsense," Yates countered. "You dance beautifully." The sun was beginning to set when the band switched to slower, more melodious tunes. Eleanor, who had been chatting with Harriet and some of the other women, looked up to find Yates approaching once more. "One more dance?" he asked softly. The melody was gentle, allowing couples to speak as they moved together. Yates held her closer than before, the propriety of daylight giving way to the intimacy of dusk. "Are you enjoying the festival?" he asked. "Very much," Eleanor replied honestly. "It's different from what I'm used to, but in the best possible way." "Different how?" Eleanor considered the question. "In Boston, social events are often performances. Everyone has a role to play, lines to deliver. Here it feels genuine. People are celebrating because they're truly happy, not because it's expected of them." Yates nodded. "That's well said. Life out here is harder in many ways, so when there's cause for celebration, folks don't hold back." They moved together in comfortable silence for a few moments, the music washing over them. "I received a letter from my mother yesterday," Eleanor said finally. "She wants me to return to Boston." Yates's step faltered slightly before he recovered. "I see, and what do you want?" "I'm not sure," Eleanor admitted. "A week ago I might have gone, now." She looked around at the twinkling lanterns, the laughing couples, the children playing tag between the adults. "Now I'm not so certain. What's holding you back?" The directness of the question startled her, but Eleanor appreciated it. "I'm beginning to feel useful here. The children at school, they need me, and—" she hesitated. "And I've met people I care about." Yates's eyes, illuminated by the lantern light, searched hers. "People who care about you too," he said quietly. The music ended, but neither moved away immediately. Around them, couples began dispersing, some to find refreshments, others to continue conversations elsewhere. "Would you walk with me?" Yates asked. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curious, Eleanor nodded. Yates led her away from the main festival, down a side street to where the church stood, its white steeple gleaming in the moonlight. "The view from the bell tower is spectacular," he explained, "especially on a clear night like this." The church was unlocked, as Eleanor had discovered most buildings in Ardmore were. Inside, the sanctuary was hushed and cool, moonlight streaming through the simple stained glass windows. "This way," Yates said, gesturing to a narrow staircase near the back. The climb was steep, but the reward at the top was worth it. The bell tower offered an unobstructed view of Ardmore and the surrounding countryside. In the distance, the festival lanterns created a pool of warm light amid the darkness. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed. "I come up here sometimes to think," Yates said, standing beside her at the railing, "when life gets complicated and I need perspective. And does it help finding perspective, usually?" He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Eleanor, I'm not a man who speaks around things. Life's too short for that." Her heart began to beat faster. "What are you saying, Yates?" "I'm saying that in the short time you've been here, you've become important to me, more than I expected." He took a deep breath. "And I'm asking you to consider staying, not just for the school or the children, but for the possibility of us." Eleanor's breath caught. "Yates, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "I know you're still healing from what happened before. I know your faith in many things has been shaken. I'm simply asking you to consider that there might be something worth building here." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. This wasn't the practiced proposal of a Boston gentleman calculated for maximum effect. This was a man laying his heart bare, asking only for consideration, not commitment. "Thank you for your honesty," Eleanor said softly. "I can't make any promises right now, but I am considering staying. And yes, you're part of the reason why." The smile that spread across Yates's face was worth any uncertainty she felt. He took her hand gently, raising it to his lips in a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and perfectly right. "That's all I can ask for," he said. They stood in companionable silence for a while longer, watching the distant festivities and the stars overhead. When they finally descended and walked back toward town, Eleanor felt lighter somehow, as if sharing her uncertainty had diminished its power over her. At Mrs. Hanson's gate, Yates paused. "There's a service tomorrow at 10 if you'd care to join me." Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't set foot in a church since leaving Boston, her faith too fragile to expose to scrutiny. "I'm not sure I'm ready," she admitted. Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The offer stands whenever you are. Remember, my faith is still yours to borrow." His simple acceptance of her reluctance touched Eleanor deeply. "Good night, Yates. Thank you for the dance. And the perspective." "Good night, Eleanor." She watched him walk away, his silhouette strong against the night sky before turning to go inside. For the first time in weeks, she fell asleep without dwelling on what she had lost, focusing instead on what she might have found. Sunday dawned bright and clear, but Eleanor remained in her room while the other boarders prepared for church. Mrs. Hanson knocked gently around 9:30. "Are you feeling unwell, dear?" she asked when Eleanor opened the door. "Just tired from the festival," Eleanor replied, though it wasn't entirely true. She was avoiding the church, avoiding confronting the remnants of her faith. Mrs. Hanson nodded, though her eyes were knowing. "Well, there's coffee in the kitchen if you'd like some. I've left some biscuits as well." "Thank you." After Mrs. Hanson departed with the other boarders, Eleanor sat at her window, watching as families made their way toward the white steeple. She spotted Yates among them, walking alongside Pastor Williams, deep in conversation. She thought about her words to him, "I lost my faith," and his simple response, "Then borrow mine for a while." What would it mean to truly do that? To lean on someone else's certainty until her own returned? Before she could second-guess herself, Eleanor changed into her Sunday dress and left the boarding house. The service would already be underway, but something drove her forward anyway, a need to see if anything remained of the comfort she'd once found in worship. The church was full when she slipped in the back, the congregation standing to sing a hymn she remembered from childhood. Eleanor remained near the door, not wanting to disrupt by searching for a seat. From her position, she could see Yates near the front, his strong voice joining the others. Pastor Williams' sermon was simpler than those Eleanor was accustomed to, but no less powerful for its directness. He spoke of community, of bearing one another's burdens, of finding strength in shared faith. "We are not meant to walk this journey alone," he said, his gaze sweeping the congregation. When one of us falters, others step in to provide support. When one loses their way, others offer guidance. This is the beauty of faith lived in community. It sustains us even when our individual faith wavers. The words resonated with Eleanor, echoing Yates's offer to lend her his faith. Perhaps that was what she'd been missing in Boston, not faith itself, but a community in which that faith could flourish and be supported. As the final hymn began, Eleanor found herself singing for the first time in months, the familiar words rising easily to her lips. She didn't notice Yates' turn at the sound of her voice, didn't see the smile that lit his face when he spotted her at the back of the church. After the service, Eleanor hesitated, uncertain whether to slip away or stay and face the inevitable introductions. The decision was made for her when Yates approached, his expression warm. "You came," he said simply. "I borrowed your faith," she replied with a small smile. "It seemed to work, Miss Blackwell." Several of her students surrounded her, excitedly showing off Sunday clothes and introducing parents who hadn't been at the festival. The next hour passed in a whirl of conversations and invitations to Sunday dinner, to quilting circles, to future socials. By the time the church had emptied, Eleanor felt both exhausted and strangely invigorated. "Hungry?" Yates asked as they descended the church steps together. "Famished," Eleanor admitted. "I know a place," he said with a grin. "If you don't mind a short ride." Intrigued, Eleanor agreed. Yates led her to a hitching post where a handsome chestnut gelding waited patiently. "This is Rusty," he said, patting the horse's neck. "He's getting on in years, but he's steady as they come." Eleanor approached carefully, offering her hand for the horse to sniff. "Hello, Rusty." "Ever ridden before?" Yates asked. "In the park in Boston, but always side saddle," Eleanor replied. Yates considered this. "Rusty can handle both of us if you're comfortable riding behind me." The thought of sitting so close to Yates sent a flutter through Eleanor's stomach, but she nodded. "I trust you." With his help, she managed to mount behind him, settling her skirts as modestly as possible. Yates showed her where to hold onto him, and then they were off, moving at an easy pace out of town. The day was perfect for riding, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scents of autumn. Eleanor gradually relaxed, allowing herself to enjoy the rhythm of the horse's movement and the solid warmth of Yates beneath her hands. "Where are we going?" she asked after they'd been riding for about 20 minutes. "My place," Yates replied. "I thought you might like to see it, and Mrs. Flores, my housekeeper, always prepares enough Sunday dinner for an army." Eleanor had been curious about Yates's ranch since he'd first mentioned it. The thought of seeing where he lived, understanding more about his life, was appealing. They crested a small hill and the ranch came into view below them. It wasn't as large as Eleanor had imagined, but it was well kept with a sturdy 2-story house, a barn, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a vegetable garden flourished near the house. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Yates urged Rusty forward, and they continued down the slope toward the ranch. As they approached, a plump woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yates Aldridge, I expected you an hour ago," she called, her accent revealing her Mexican heritage. "Sorry, Mrs. Flores," Yates replied as he helped Eleanor dismount. "Church ran long and I've brought a guest." Mrs. Flores's stern expression melted into a warm smile as she looked at Eleanor. "Ah, the new school teacher. I've heard much about you from my grandchildren. They say you tell the best stories." "Your grandchildren," Eleanor tried to place the family. "The Ramirez children," Mrs. Flores explained. "My daughter married Eduardo Ramirez 5 years ago. Of course, Maria and little Eduardo, they're wonderful children," Eleanor said, genuinely pleased to make the connection. Mrs. Flores beamed. "Come inside, come. The food is ready, and you both look hungry." The interior of Yates's home surprised Eleanor. She had expected a bachelor's Spartan quarters, but instead found a comfortable, well-appointed living space. The furniture was solid and well-made, the walls adorned with a few quality paintings, and bookshelves lined one entire wall of the front room. "You have so many books," she exclaimed, drawn immediately to the shelves. Yates smiled. "My mother's influence." She believed a house without books was just a shelter, not a home. Eleanor ran her fingers along the spines, recognizing classics alongside volumes on animal husbandry, geology, and history. She had eclectic taste. She believed in understanding the world from every angle possible, Yates replied, his voice softening with memory. She used to say knowledge is the one thing they can never take from you, so gather as much as you can. A wise woman, Eleanor murmured, Mrs. Flores bustled in from the kitchen. Enough about books, food first, reading later, come sit. The dining room was dominated by a large oak table that could easily seat 10. Today it was set for 3, with simple but elegant dishware that Eleanor suspected had been Yates's mother's. The meal was magnificent roast chicken with herbs, potatoes, fresh vegetables from the garden, and homemade bread still warm from the oven. Eleanor hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aromas enveloped her. "This is wonderful, Mrs. Flores," she said after her first bite. "I haven't had cooking this good since leaving Boston." The housekeeper's face lit with pleasure. "It is good to cook for someone who appreciates it. This one," she gestured at Yates, "would eat beans and bacon every day if I let him." "That's not true," Yates protested good-naturedly. "I'd want biscuits with those beans." Their easy banter spoke of long familiarity and genuine affection. Eleanor found herself relaxing, drawn into their conversation as Mrs. Flores recounted stories of Yates as a young man, much to his mock dismay. He was always bringing home strays, Mrs. Flores told Eleanor over coffee and apple pie. Dogs, cats, once even a hawk with a broken wing. His father would say, "Boy, we're running a ranch, not a menagerie," but Yates would just smile and promise it was temporary. "And was it?" Eleanor asked, glancing at Yates. "Usually," he admitted. "Though Rex stayed." He nodded toward a graying dog sleeping by the fireplace, who thumped his tail at the mention of his name. After the meal, Mrs. Flores shooed them out while she cleared up, refusing Eleanor's offers of help with firm instructions to show the lady the ranch, Yates. The afternoon passed pleasantly as Yates gave Eleanor a tour of his property. He spoke knowledgeably about the cattle, the crops he rotated to maintain the soil, the improvements he was making to the irrigation system. Eleanor found herself genuinely interested, asking questions that revealed her quick mind and practical nature. "You've built something remarkable here," she said as they paused on a rise overlooking the pastures. "It's been in my family for 3 generations," Yates replied. "My grandfather came out after the Civil War, started with just 50 acres and 10 head of cattle. My father expanded it, and now I'm doing the same." He glanced at her. "It's a good life, if sometimes a solitary one." The implication hung in the air between them, neither ready to address it directly. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky when they returned to the house. Mrs. Flores had left a note saying she'd gone to her daughter's for the evening, but would return in the morning to prepare breakfast. "I should get you back to town before dark," Yates said, though Eleanor sensed reluctance in his voice. "Yes, I suppose so," she agreed, equally reluctant to end the day. The ride back was quieter than the journey out, both lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor found herself imagining what it would be like to stay at the ranch, to build a life there. The vision was startlingly clear and appealing. At Mrs. Hanson's gate, Yates helped her down from Rusty, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for today," Eleanor said softly, "for everything." "It was my pleasure," Yates replied. "Perhaps next Sunday we could do it again. There's a spot by the creek I think you'd enjoy." Eleanor smiled. "I'd like that." He hesitated, then leaned forward and brushed his lips against her cheek, a gesture so gentle it might have been the touch of a butterfly's wing. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Yates." She watched him ride away, her cheek tingling where his lips had touched. Something was growing between them, something tender and promising. For the first time since arriving in Ardmore, Eleanor found herself looking forward not just to tomorrow, but to many tomorrows stretching out before her. The following weeks settled into a pattern that brought Eleanor increasing contentment. Weekdays were filled with teaching, her confidence growing as she developed her own methods for engaging the children. Harriet proved to be not just a colleague but a true friend. the two women often working late into the evening to prepare lessons or grade assignments. Saturdays were for errands and socializing quilting circles with the town women, where Eleanor's fine stitching earned grudging respect from even the most accomplished seamstresses. Trips to the general store for supplies, occasional outings with Harriet or other friends she was gradually making. And Sundays were for Yates. They attended church together, Eleanor finding her way back to a faith that felt different from before but no less meaningful. After services, they would ride to the ranch for dinner with Mrs. Flores, followed by long afternoons exploring the property or simply sitting on the porch, talking as the sun traced its arc across the sky. Eleanor wrote to her mother regularly, explaining her decision to stay in Ardmore without revealing too much about Yates. Some things she felt were too precious, too new to share just yet, even with her family. October gave way to November, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of the winter to come. Eleanor found herself helping prepare for Thanksgiving, a holiday that took on new meaning in a community where the harvest directly affected everyone's well-being. "We always host Thanksgiving at the ranch," Yates told her one Sunday as they walked along the creek that bordered his property. "It started with my parents inviting hands who had nowhere else to go and grew from there. Last year we had 30 people. That's wonderful," Eleanor said, imagining the long table filled with friends and neighbors. "It must be quite an undertaking, Mrs. Flores starts planning weeks in advance," Yates grinned. "She'd be delighted to have your help if you're willing." "Of course," Eleanor replied, touched by the inclusion. "I'd love to be part of it." They had reached a small clearing where the creek widened into a pool, its surface reflecting the late afternoon sun. Yates spread his coat on a flat rock for them to sit on, the stone still holding the day's warmth. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said after a comfortable silence. "But I've been waiting for the right moment." Eleanor's heart quickened. "And is this the right moment?" Yates took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I hope so." He met her eyes directly, his own clear and certain. "Eleanor, I care for you deeply. These past weeks have been the happiest I can remember. I find myself thinking about you when we're apart, looking forward to the next time I'll see your smile or hear your laugh." "Yates," Eleanor began, but he gently squeezed her hand. "Please, let me finish. I know it hasn't been long, and I know you came to Ardmore with different expectations, but I believe what's grown between us is real and lasting." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you'd consider a courtship properly and openly. I want to do this right, with respect and patience." The formal request, so characteristic of Yates's straightforward honor, moved Eleanor deeply. In Boston, relationships often progressed through elaborate social rituals designed to mask true intentions. Here was a man simply asking for the chance to love her without pretense or calculation. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "I would like that very much." The smile that illuminated Yates's face warmed her more than any fire could have. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You've made me very happy," he said simply. "As you have me," Eleanor replied, realizing the truth of it as she spoke. Somehow, in this unlikely place with this unexpected man, she had found a happiness she'd never known before. They sat by the creek until the sun began to set, talking of small things and large, sharing hopes and memories. When they finally rose to return to the ranch, Eleanor felt as though something fundamental had shifted, as if the world had realigned itself around this new reality. News of their courtship spread quickly through Ardmore, met with general approval and a few knowing smiles from those who had observed their growing closeness. Harriet was particularly delighted, confiding to Eleanor that she had seen it coming from the first moment Yates looked at you. Thanksgiving at the ranch exceeded Eleanor's expectations. The house was transformed, tables set end to end in the main room to accommodate the nearly 40 guests who arrived throughout the day. Mrs. Flores commanded the kitchen like a general, assigning tasks with brisk efficiency while somehow maintaining her warm hospitality. Eleanor found herself responsible for pies, apple, pumpkin, and mincemeat under Mrs. Flores's watchful eye. The older woman had initially been skeptical of Eleanor's baking abilities, but was won over when the first perfectly golden crust emerged from the oven. "You have good hands," she declared, the highest praise she could offer. "Steady and patient, important for baking, important for life." By the time the feast began, Eleanor felt fully integrated into the celebration, no longer a newcomer but a valued participant. She sat beside Yates at the center of the long table, helping to serve the younger children and ensuring everyone's cup remained full. Pastor Williams said the blessing, his voice carrying over the assembled company. "We thank you, Lord, for this abundance, for the hands that prepared it, for the community gathered here, and for the countless blessings of the past year. We especially thank you for bringing new friends into our midst," he added with a warm glance at Eleanor, "and for the joy of seeing your love manifested in unexpected ways." The meal that followed was magnificent: 2 turkeys, a ham, countless side dishes, and Eleanor's pies, which earned enthusiastic praise. Conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional friendly debate about everything from cattle prices to the proper way to prepare cornbread stuffing. Later, as the afternoon faded into evening and guests began to depart, Eleanor found herself on the porch with Yates, watching the last wagons disappear down the lane. "Thank you for today," she said, leaning against the railing beside him. "It was wonderful." Yates smiled, his eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "Having you here, seeing you with everyone, it felt right, Eleanor." "It did," she agreed softly. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I've been thinking about Christmas." "Oh." Eleanor tried to ignore the flutter in her chest at his serious expression. "My mother always said Christmas was the time for new beginnings, for hope renewed." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I was wondering if you'd consider making a new beginning with me officially." Eleanor's breath caught. "Yates, are you?" "Not proposing, not yet," he clarified with a gentle smile. "But I'd like to give you something at Christmas, something that signifies my intentions, a promise for the future when you're ready." The thoughtfulness of it, his recognition that she might need more time, his willingness to move at her pace while still making his intentions clear, touched Eleanor deeply. "I would be honored," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions welling within her. "And Yates, I think by Christmas I might be ready for more than a promise." His eyes widened slightly, hope illuminating his features. "Eleanor," she stepped closer, emboldened by the certainty growing within her. "These past months have healed something in me I thought was broken beyond repair. You asked me to borrow your faith until I found mine again. I have, Yates, and in finding it, I've also found where I belong." Yates closed the distance between them, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "May I?" he asked softly. At her nod, he leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle meeting of lips that conveyed tenderness rather than passion. Eleanor's hands rested lightly on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingers. When they parted, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life," he whispered. "I'm here now," Eleanor replied simply, "and I'm not going anywhere." The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a whirl of activity. The school held its annual pageant, with Eleanor directing the younger children in a nativity scene that brought proud tears to parents' eyes. The town organized a charity drive for families struggling after a poor harvest, with Eleanor and Harriet coordinating donations of food, clothing, and gifts. Through it all, Eleanor's relationship with Yates deepened. Their courtship, conducted under the approving eyes of the community, was characterized by small gestures rather than grand ones. A book he thought she'd enjoy, wildflowers gathered during his morning ride, meals shared by lamplight at the ranch. They spoke of the future in increasingly concrete terms. Yates described improvements he wanted to make to the house, subtly seeking Eleanor's input on changes that would make it more comfortable for a family. Eleanor found herself imagining her books alongside his on the shelves, her personal touches softening the masculine spaces. A week before Christmas, Eleanor received another letter from her mother, this one containing news that might once have devastated her. Charles Worthington was married last Sunday to Miss Amelia Thornton, her mother wrote. The ceremony was small, given the circumstances, but by all accounts, the bride was lovely. I thought you should hear this from family rather than through gossip. Eleanor read the words with surprising equanimity. The man she had traveled west to marry now belonged to another woman, yet she felt no pain, only a vague relief that the last ties to her old life had been severed cleanly. That evening she showed the letter to Yates as they sat before the fire at the ranch, Rex dozing at their feet. "Are you all right?" he asked after reading it, his concern evident. Eleanor nodded, smiling softly. "More than all right. I realized reading it that I'm grateful to Charles in a strange way. If he hadn't broken our engagement, I'd never have come to Ardmore. I'd never have found the work that fulfills me, the community that supports me." She reached for his hand. "I'd never have found you." Yates brought her hand to his lips. "His loss is my immeasurable gain." On Christmas Eve, Eleanor joined Yates and Mrs. Flores for a quiet dinner at the ranch before the midnight service at the church. The house was beautifully decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, a magnificent tree standing in the corner of the front room, adorned with paper ornaments, strings of berries, and small candles waiting to be lit. After dinner, they exchanged gifts by the firelight. Mrs. Flores received a fine wool shawl from Eleanor and a brooch that had belonged to Yates's mother, bringing tears to the housekeeper's eyes. She, in turn, presented Eleanor with an intricately embroidered table runner and Yates with a new leather-bound journal. "For a man with many thoughts, a place to keep them," she said affectionately. When Mrs. Flores excused herself to prepare for the service, Yates turned to Eleanor, suddenly serious. "I have something else for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Something I've been thinking about for a long time." He withdrew a small box wrapped in silver paper. Eleanor accepted it with hands that trembled slightly, understanding the significance of the moment. Inside the box nestled a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," Yates explained softly. "My grandfather gave it to her when they decided to make their life in the West." He said the pearl represented the beauty that comes from adversity, just as their love had grown stronger through the challenges they faced. He took the ring from its box and held it between them. "Eleanor Blackwell, I love you. These past months have shown me that what I once thought was a complete life was actually just the foundation for something far greater. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Eleanor looked into his eyes, seeing there all the steadiness and warmth that had drawn her to him from the beginning. In this man, she had found not just a partner but a home, a place where she could be fully herself, where her strengths were valued and her weaknesses understood. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "With all my heart, yes." Yates slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. "I promise to love you faithfully and completely for the rest of our days," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "And I promise the same," Eleanor replied. "To love you, to build a life with you, to face whatever comes together." Their kiss sealed the promise, deeper and more passionate than those they had shared before, a testament to the future they would create together. Later, as they walked hand in hand to the church, the stars brilliant in the clear winter sky, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Ardmore broken, her faith in love and in herself shattered by betrayal. She had found not only healing but transformation, becoming a woman stronger and more complete than she had ever been in Boston. The church was filled with candlelight and familiar faces, the community that had become her own. As they took their places in a pew, Yates whispered in her ear, "Are you happy?" Eleanor squeezed his hand, the ring on her finger catching the light. "More than I ever believed possible." Pastor Williams smiled broadly when he spotted them, his eyes noting the ring immediately. His sermon that night spoke of hope reborn, of faith that sustains through darkness, of love that transforms and redeems. "We celebrate tonight the greatest gift ever given," he concluded, "a love so profound it changes everything it touches. May we carry that love with us throughout the coming year, sharing it freely with all we meet." As the congregation rose to sing the final hymn, Eleanor's voice joined with Yates's, their harmony a promise for the days to come. She had lost her faith once, had borrowed his when she needed it most. Now, together, they were building something new, a shared faith in each other, in their future, in the life they would create in this wild, beautiful place that had become her true home. Outside, snow began to fall, gentle flakes drifting in the still night air, covering Ardmore in a blanket of white. A clean slate, Eleanor thought. A perfect beginning. They would marry in the spring, when the wildflowers bloomed across the prairie. Their children would grow up knowing both books and the land, learning the constellations that guided travelers home and the stories that connected generations. There would be challenges, drought years, harsh winters, the inevitable sorrows that touch all lives, but they would face them together, their faith in each other unshakable. And many years later, when their hair had turned silver and their faces were lined with the memories of a life well lived, they would still sometimes stand together under the vast Oklahoma sky, her hand in his, and remember the words that had brought them together. She had said, "I lost my faith," and he had answered, "Then borrow mine for a while." It had been enough, more than enough. It had been everything,